bottom line is it's even more reason to not be surprised by these results, at least as it regards to party affiliations.
Excellent, excellent. So, for those of you that might be joining us live, you're just joining us live because I forgot to hit the button. And this is what happens when you're doing a brand new thing. Too many buttons to push, guys. But
All
anyway,
these
we're getting
buttons.
to the meat of it. You missed all the silly stuff in the beginning. My apologies if you like silly. This is not a silly conversation, but we want to start off a little lighthearted. Like I said, there's just some things that maybe didn't go the way that we thought we would like. Like you said, I also heard other people say like the things how they turned out was kind of what you would expect based on the locations and all that. Um, and the thumbnail on this particular video says, "Now what?" So what is our response as believers, as people that want to be engaged? You talk about there's certain ones that are kind of went even farther than what maybe you would expect as far as how people voted. So what does that say about where we're at?
Yeah. I think there's massive evangelism opportunities, if I'm being honest, Mark and Dr. J. Because one of my bottom line theses coming out of this election is we're seeing a new face of the Democrat Party in America. Even if you are traditionally identify with voting with that party, that's fine. I'm not here to say this is what the Democrat voters look like. But I think coming away from these elections, it's undeniable that the future of the Democrat Party's faces, like their leadership, are three things. They're Muslim, they're socialist, and they're violent. And that's where the opportunity comes in for Christian because we are Christians, we're not Muslims. We're definitely not socialists. Socialist is at least as anti-God as Islam in different ways. And Christians are not violent, at least not politically violent. We have there's schools of theology that allow Christians to be violent in defense of good things in very directed ways. There's a long ways from that. I'm talking about political violence. Christians are not that. So that's my thesis, and that's why that's an opportunity for Christians to showcase that we actually love our neighbors, whether they disagree with us politically or not, regardless of what we think of their policy positions or their beliefs. We love our neighbors. And this is an opportunity for us to shine in this new age where political violence, plans to do it, thoughts about it, fantasies about it are pretty acceptable now, at least according to one half of the electorate in these specific jurisdictions.
Yeah, no, that's a lot to think about. Dr. J, did you have any things you want to chime in right now?
Yeah, of course. And thank you again, Joseph, for being here. Um, yeah, so anytime things in our lives don't go as expected, we all have to go back to God and ask the question. And I think you hit the nail on the head. Massive amount of opportunity to really evangelize and also to reflect. So I would love to kind of get your comments and your position on as Christians, right? How do we position ourselves in a I don't know, better position ourselves to be able to do that evangelism? I know it's sometimes easy to get caught up in, verses, right? Conservative versus liberal, all these labels. How do we best position ourselves to show people and be able to evangelize, say, hey, we actually do love our neighbor. If we don't have to agree on everything for me to respect you. um, Things have just become so I don't know. It's like walking on eggshells now. It's like or a landfill, right? And anything that you say or do can just set someone off. I mean, we've seen it in the media, but all those things aside that I just named, how do we better position ourselves to be able to do that evangelism?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think we live in an age of gaslighting where you see one thing and then you hear voices around you, and particularly in media, but just even day to day saying, no, what you see there is actually not that, it's this. So I think for ministers, and I mean I'm not a minister, but I am in professional ministry because that looks different than just ministers. But if I were talking to people who were in local church ministry or even national ministry like myself, I'd say because we live in a gaslighting age, whatever you say, you have to bring the receipts for. And that's not just when it comes to scripture. Like I think we all kind of take that for granted, and I'm presuming that in ministers that you're gonna be a good faith teacher of the Bible. Okay, that's elementary stuff. When I say bring the receipts, what I mean is if we're gonna call out people for being violent in their rhetoric, their behavior, or in advocating for it. You have to prove why you think that's the truth, like why they're A, that person or that belief is violent, and then B, why that's wrong. So I think I trust people to do the latter part. If you're biblically literate, it's pretty clear the Bible does not allow you to be politically violent. In fact, it's pretty clear the Bible proscribes that. But when I say bring the receipts, what I mean is if I'm going to go out and say the new Virginia Attorney General is clearly a violent individual who wishes violence on his political opponents, I have to bring the receipts for that. Fortunately, that's quite easy. It's been widely reported from outlets of all persuasions, verifying the authenticity of text messages Jay Jones has sent, wishing that the former Republican Speaker of the House here in Virginia would be shot, that his children would be shot, and that he would like to desecrate their graves. That's what bringing the receipts looks like. Like I have that. I can send the information to people from the Washington Post all the way to the Daily Wire. You have Republican and Democrat, liberal and conservative outlets all agree on this. So that's just an example in my mind is you got to bring the receipts or people aren't going to believe you because we live in a gaslighting age. But when you do, I think you hold that up as this is a potentially at least expressively violent individual. What do we as Christians look like in opposite to that? It's I
Mm,
don't care how noxious I might find somebody else's political opinions. God loves that person as much as he loves me,
yeah.
created us both in his image, both in equal dignity. And no matter what he says that he wishes to do to me, or how he leverages the state's law enforcement apparatus to oppress me, I'm going to reflect Jesus no matter what. I think
Man, I
that
think
is
that's
something people are looking for now.
wow, that is powerful. And I think too, Joseph, what it does, honestly, it challenges us to walk out what we say we believe because it forces us to this blue wave and everything that comes with it. It's not going away. And so how do we respond? We can either just continue to say what we want to say and just live our lives, or we can actually say, okay, what does being a Christian truly look like? And am I aligning myself with the word of God in my day-to-day life, whether it's politics or otherwise? I think you really hit the nail on the head. And I wanted to thank you for sharing that, because I have to ask myself that that question. It's like, how do I do a better job of making sure that I'm being a light, I'm being salt in the earth? And I think it also comes with those receipts. The enemy does not like facts. He does not like truth. And so I do encourage Christians who are out there, like, make sure you're doing your research. If you're not taking the time to read your Bible and find out what God has for you there, you're probably not taking much time to figure out if what the news outlet is saying is actually accurate and doing your research there. So I think it goes hand in hand.
Yeah, and I do want to encourage people, though, for everything I just said, there is a very open middle segment of the American people that are very open to hearing this, to people who behave like this, because one of the political phenomenons is as one party radicalizes, and another party potentially reacts to that by radicalizing, it leaves a lot of what we might call normies in the middle who don't feel at home with either party. They feel kind of homeless. No one's speaking to them. Obviously, that's a very undesirable political position. But for Christians, that's a mission field right there. Is I just want somebody who's not crazy. I just want some, and if we start at that point, that's a pretty low bar for Christians. I think we can do a little better than just not crazy,
Yeah.
especially when we have so many tools in our arsenal, like loving your enemies, blessing those who persecute you. How about our church, Mark, that's going to actively feed thousands of people during this Thanksgiving period? I mean, that we're going to be more successful at something the rest of the country ceded to the government generations ago than the government's ever going to be at it in just this one stretch. So I think that's where the encouragement and really the opportunity should be. You should see this as low-hanging fruit, Christians. Like you have a very open group of people who feel politically, ideologically homeless, who are ready to receive what you have to convey to them or what Christ has to convey to them through you.
Those are great thoughts. And I'm thinking specifically, you mentioned earlier, which may not be on the live part that we're now in, uh, that the New York City results for the mayoral election, and you laid out like where the that side of the aisle is going, like who's emerging as leaders.
Yeah.
And I saw a couple of things that relate to that election that were interesting. Number one, people that lived in New York City apparently less than 5 years overwhelmingly voted for Mamdani. And then people that had lived there, are born there, it was like very few, like as far as comparatively, right? You had way
Hmm.
more going to the traditional Democratic candidate, was former governor, and uh, and that sort of thing. So the less people had experienced New York City, the more they went with this uh, utopia kind of experience that he's promising, right? And the other thing was Ben Shapiro speaking to, hey, it was like a panel afterwards, like speaking to the Democratic side. He's
That was
like,
on CNN, I think, right?
was yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, you guys need to watch out. Like this isn't the people that you want to speak for your whole movement because it's not the traditional value, not whatever traditional values for the Democrat side are. So I just found those kind of pieces of information to be interesting. Would love your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think that's probably a good place to at least start when we're talking about these races is the New York City mayoral one because it's the headliner. It's New York City for crying out loud. It's more powerful than most world economies, forget American states. So, and it's the financial capital of the world, which is why it's so telling, like you said, Mark, that they elected a socialist mayor. This is the guy who talks about seizing the means of production, right? It's not exactly squares with Wall Street. So I think Ben Shapiro, he's not a Christian, but he is a very devout, practicing Orthodox Jew, shares a lot of our values. I think that makes a lot of sense personally, because you got to think who this guy is. He's not just he says he's a devout Muslim, but he's also in favor of LGBT rights. Now, we can talk later about how those things possibly cohere in one person. They seem pretty contradictory to me. There is a reason why he can have both those positions. But think about that group of middle Americans that I just described a few minutes ago, right? Does that sound like the kind of person they might be swayed to vote for in a national election when, the presidency or control of Congress is on the line? I don't think so. I think we are undoubtedly in uncharted territory for American politics in terms of this is the direction the Democrat Party is moving in. It's very increasingly radical, contradictory, non-appealing to normies, faces of the party. And that's, I mean, the people that elect Zoran Mamdani are people who vote in Democrat primaries. So my personal prediction is that when we do come to the 2028 presidential elections, whoever the Democrats elect to represent them in that election will look more like Zoran Mamdani than will look like Chuck Schumer or Hakeem Jeffries. And I feel like the dodgeball movie meme. It's a bold strategy, Cotton. We'll see if it plays out for him. Either
Yep.
way, it's a high risk thing though, because what if it does work out? And instead of just New York City, you got regular people in Alabama and Arizona getting governed by a Mamdani type. I mean, it sounds like a recipe for at least internal strife in America, which I would argue is yet another opportunity for Christians, but we shouldn't wish that upon our country.
Yeah, that's great thoughts to consider. One of the things that's come to mind over the last day or so is this idea of goat nations and sheep nations. I don't know if you
Hmm.
heard people talk about this theology, right? And I've heard different Bible teachers talk about that. In times, you're going to have essentially the countries, quote unquote, that align with what Jesus is doing, and those that don't, right? And but then I look at it in relation to blue states and red states, right? You have some that are following more closely what biblical values are versus, the what some other states are clearly not doing whatsoever, right? So um, so I was thinking about all that, and in the Bible it talks about that. Or actually, it's Jesus who says this, right? He says, you know, he didn't say quote unquote, I'm going to separate a goat nation from sheep nation, but it's like they're all the ethnos. So that's all the different people groups. And it can be translated that. So I'm just kind of looking at these things as kind of, you're seeing the separation of darkness and light in these different ideologies. And are we moving more and more towards that reality that Jesus spoke of?
Yeah, I think I see what you mean in that it would almost be like blue states are getting bluer, red states are getting redder, right? I think that notion though it gives a lot of uncertainty to Americans. I don't blame them for that. Here I am in a state that's deep blue doesn't share my values. Do I stay or do I go? Um, I- Regardless of what I do, lots of people are doing what we call voting with their feet. If you're a conservative in California, you've probably moved to Texas or Florida by this point. And if you're a liberal in Texas or Florida, you've probably moved to New York or Maine by this point. Um, I actually think that's good from a policy, electoral perspective. Leave my theology aside, and I don't think theology lines up nicely with political parties nowadays. I think there is a clear difference between the two theologically, which leads Christians to make certain electoral decisions. But generally speaking, I don't think they overlap uh, particularly well. That said, this separation of diametrically opposed policy positions is challenging for the American electorate, but ultimately good because it makes the distinction between them starker. So in the coming years, as people continue to vote for their feet, red jurisdictions get redder, blue jurisdictions get bluer. The contrast between their two policies and the effects of those policies will be much more starker, and that will make the choices much easier for Americans when they go to the ballot box, much less where they buy a house. And I think that's a particularly healthy thing. I think it's in this age of gaslighting, like I mentioned earlier, it's hard to gaslight someone and say, oh, things are great in California when over the next 10 years, things are going to be able to see, people are going to pretty clearly be able to tell, no, things are not good in California. But I have no state income tax in Florida, so maybe I should, vote along the lines of those policies from Florida because clearly life is better. I think that clarity will be a good thing for Americans as we go into the next decade or two.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. I would agree with that as well. When you just think from, because I used to wonder this all the time, because you have our, federal government, right? Then you have state and local government, and no one wants to feel like they're like ice skating uphill or fighting against the grain. So it's like if you don't agree with X, Y, and Z and you find a better fit, red or blue, right? Go to that one because at the end of the day, it does make it a lot easier for me if I was in local government or wherever to that's what it's supposed to be, right? You're supposed to be fighting for your people, the people who believe the way that you believe and all of this stuff. And so it's going to get very interesting. Actually, as we're seeing in at this as this election has taken place, it's already getting very interesting to see these dynamics play out.
Yeah. I mean, I join you in Dr. J encouraging people to vote with their feet for sure. And I think at a general level, yes, local governments have their first responsibilities to local people in that area. And Christians generally share that proximity of duties, right? Like my first duty is to God, my next duty is to my spouse and my kids, then my broader church community, then my community, and we expand out.
Mhm.
Right. But Christians never have no duties to most people in their orbit, right? We have to be mindful of the vulnerable everywhere that we could possibly have any sort of impact. And the other encouragement I'll give people just in this age where it is easier now to move in the world we live in, especially in America, than has ever been in world history. You can call up a moving truck, you can get a realtor, sell your house pretty easily, even in this housing market. Like it is very easy to move comparatively speaking, throughout all of human history. I feel like Christians, and particularly Christian parents, if you don't at least have an emergency break glass in case of emergency plan for this, I feel like you should consider that in today's world, not because your government's going off the rails in your mind, but because there are forces in your local life that are very opposed to the family and pose a clear and present danger to your children. And it's not an exaggeration to say this because we know pretty clearly that the education movement, or not movement, the education apparatus, I'll say, particularly led by teachers' unions, really do see parents as the enemy. And some parents I know of have had to take the extreme action of if their school, collaborating with the local hospital, is trying to transition the children to another gender without that parent's knowledge or consent, you might just have to leave. I hate that it's that simple, but I know numerous parents that have had to do that in the last few years. And hopefully you live in a place where that's totally outside any semblance of possibility. Like hopefully you live in a place where you know your teachers, you know your school administrators, they would never dream of that. Hopefully, you know all your healthcare people in the area, and they would never do that. But I think a lot of Americans don't have that luxury. And as parents, because our kids are our first duty, You have to have whatever that emergency backup plan is where, if a hospital is not going to release my kid unless I sent to them giving them puberty blockers so they can transition genders, like I think you should have a backup plan there, and you don't have to you don't have to break the law or anything to do that. Just have a plan like, okay, if we were to sell our house, how would we do it? If we were to move, where would we go? This is not normal or not abnormal for Christians historically. Christians have always been pilgrims, willing to go wherever God calls them. I just think American Christians, because America's been such a great place for religious freedom, have been very comfortable in the last 100 years, very unconcerned with the things that most Christians have had to be concerned with around the world, like violence against us. The stories out of Nigeria are providing a helpful contrast to us in that sense, and that reminding us that we are not the norm as American Christians in being safe. This is what the rest of the churches had to deal with throughout the rest of time, and unfortunately, that might be creeping in to America. But the point is, we have a history of doing this as Christians. We can do this if God's calling us to.
Speaking of moving, I saw this graphic and got a little chuckle out of it. So, for those of you that want to leave the blue states, someone's helpfully diagrammed where Florida and Texas are. So, yes.
That was pretty funny. Yeah, the great conservative or Christian, I'm sorry, commentator Allie Beth Stuckey tweeted yesterday, for everybody in blue states who votes blue, I want you to know Florida is closed. We are full. We are at max capacity.
Right. Yeah. And that's, you know, as I mentioned earlier, there's this idea of the overreacting to any one moment in life, and could be elections, could be other things. And I found it interesting that someone was asking President Trump, and he seemed completely unbothered by the results, and he said something in effect to, Mom Downey needs to watch out or whatever, based on what some of his plans are. So I think that's, the reality of where we're at, right? We can't be a prisoner of the moment, and, God's still on the throne. That was one of the things I put in the description is like, is God still in control? Uh, yes.
Yeah, no, definitely. The problem is a lot of people use the guys in control line as an excuse not to do anything. And I think the challenge of the Christian life is balancing what we know to be true with what God's calling us to do at the same time, or maybe challenging us to consider doing in service to Him. Because I've heard way too many people say, "Oh, God's in control, so I can just go on not voting." Not caring about people in my community, not getting involved with my school board, not really investigating the curriculum that my kids are being exposed to at their school. God is in control, yes, but He does vest us with duties and obligations. And better than that, He has a plan and a purpose for your life that we should always be better seeking to understand. Our local pastor here, Mark, is so good about uh, teaching us and training us to write down the visions God has given us for our life. Because when you write it down, it becomes a true north for you to refer to when things get hectic. Times like this can feel hectic, whether they are or not. And I would just challenge Christians, yes, if you're struggling with your peace or anxiety, definitely lean on that truth that God is in control. And one election is not going to change that. There's actually no election that can change that. But use that to recenter yourself and then realize, okay, if God is in control, and no matter what's happening around me, God still has a good plan and a purpose for my life and a reason for me to serve his kingdom. He blesses us to be a blessing. He didn't just bring you to a relationship with him just for your sake. He did that for your sake, but for other people's as well. Other people's salvation, protection is on the other side of your obedience. So from that foundation of God is in control, we can springboard off no matter what's going on around us to daring things that God has for us. And I think that's a superpower that Christians have just by the fact that God rescued us.
I agree, sir. Um, the thing after the fact, where we're at now, we mentioned before, feeling hopeless and all that. Is like I did my duty, but
Yeah.
nothing worked out the way I wanted it to. So what's the encouragement moving forward? Like you said, there wasn't really a surprise based on, how states and cities are populated with certain types of people. And I think maybe some people will be like, oh, look what happened 2 years ago. We're moving in the right direction. Then you're like, oh, no, no, we're not. Well, I think it's both and, right? There's
Yeah.
some things moving in the right direction. There's the enemy's still at work, and there's still ideologies that are from Satan, honestly. And how do people move forward now that they felt like, oh, I did my civic duty and see, didn't help, but
Yeah.
there are things to do though.
Yeah, I mean, I have some thoughts on that. I want to hear what you both think, though, just because this is, your wheelhouse as well. I would just say, we're only 36 hours away from the polls closing, essentially. So people unpacking the results are still coming in. This is what football fans call overreaction Monday. Like we're still at the point where people are all sky is falling. We need dramatic changes. I think that dust will settle, and there's going to be some need for changes, and there's going to be coherent strategies on both sides coming out of this. We'll see how effective those are. But one piece of encouragement I think people can take from it is that, and I just read this morning, so it took a full day for this particular reaction to come out, which is that here in Virginia we had two gubernatorial candidates, it's candidates for governor. Both of them are women. One of them was a black woman, Winsome Earl Sears, who's our current lieutenant governor here. She was the Republican candidate, right? Evangelical Christians traditionally vote Republican. At least that's what the social science tells us. Well, evangelical Christians, especially in the past few years, but really throughout the last 30 years, I would argue, have been pilloried as not real Christians, as racists, as bigots, white supremacists. In fact, I know of academics who have made the argument that evangelical Christianity isn't even a religion. It is just a political identity driving a political movement or supporting other movements. Well, the Virginia polling and voting statistics completely blew that out of the water because here's Winsome Earl Sears, a black woman. Over 80% of evangelical Christians who voted in this election voted for her. And what that shows is they don't care what a candidate looks like. They care about a candidate who thinks like they do, who shares their values, and who wants to protect them and further those values because those values have been proven to lead to human flourishing, particularly here in America. So I think that's an encouragement people can take out of it as a repudiation of all the slander that is heaped on evangelical Christians to try to keep them home on election day. That's ultimately the goal of this slander is accusing them of Christian nationalism just because they want to vote their values. All right. That should, fortunately, the people that did vote didn't let that keep them from voting their values, generally speaking. And also, if you're on the fence about this, or I feel bad for you if you felt the weight of that slander, you're the person I'm speaking to, don't listen to that. It's not true. They don't have the receipts. I do. And you should go out and vote your values because that's what God wants you to do. And that's, I think, the only conclusion of the values that we hold. So that was a reaction I thought was particularly helpful, at least for me personally, and I think could help some other people out there. But I want to know what you guys think about where we go after this for people of faith, whatever jurisdiction you're in, especially if you didn't have an election on Tuesday.
Oh yeah, I definitely have some comments on that. One thing comes to mind. Lord tells me this all the time: do not become weary in well doing. Right?
Mm.
It's about who we are, our identity in Christ. It calls us to continue to press forward, and to not fall into these sound bites and other things that you see in the media or what people say, like you talk about the skies falling. In our Christian walk and journey, it's a process. It's always been a process. And sometimes even when we are talking to different people who may not agree with us, just because they disagree now, don't mean they're going to disagree in the future, right? We always treat everything as, oh, we lost the election. We lost this. We gained this. Trump is in the White House now. Woo! Everything's going to be great, right? That's that's never the case. So I think this is a great opportunity to look at individual responsibility, especially if you have kids. We were talking about voting with your feet. I would be putting all of that before the Lord and say, hey, have I become too comfortable with how great America is and or used to be or whatever, and I've just decided, hey, this is where I'm going to raise my family? Maybe it's time to reassess, is this what's best for my family? Like, what is best for my family? Do we stay here? Maybe I'm supposed to fight, continue the good fight for my county or whatever. Sometimes it's not even moving states. I know when you see the national elections and they do it by county, and you see how some counties, like they're like all these red counties together and then blue. And so it could just be moving a county or a district or what have you. But those are the conversations I think that this is a good time to have. Even if there's no election currently happening in your state, we see what's happening in other states. And if it's happening there, it may be knocking on your door soon. So better ask the question sooner rather than later.
Yeah, I'm going to piggyback off of what you were talking about, personal responsibility, and we're going to get a little controversial here, guys. Um, so I was just talking to my wife, who is a pastor, and we were just talking about, well, I was, and she was agreeing, so that was cool. But this idea of personal responsibility as it relates to the roles that we play as men and women, right? And I saw this, people were calling this out on X, formerly Twitter, and and this is obviously a little bit of a harsh take, and I don't know how accurate it is in reality, but people saying like the white liberal woman is going to be the downfall of our society, and all this, and like all the young white women voted for these very, leftist, socialist, all that kind of stuff. And I think some of the data shows that that's true. Like they were very much out front as far as the number of people that voted for those. And to me, it is a spiritual picture of men vacating their role of leadership in spiritually first and foremost, and how we look at the feminist movement and what's some of the results of that, how men have not taken their rightful place to lead spiritually first and foremost. And then you get the opposite effect where you have all this trans ideology taking over, where men literally trying to become women. It's like this whole reversal of roles, like, oh, I'm no longer valued, so I'm going to identify as something that is valued, which is a woman, right? Like, oh, I am a woman, hear me roar, that whole ideology. Yeah, there is great power in what God created you to be. And so what the enemy's done is flipped all these things, or that's his role is try to do this, right? Whatever God's put into place, he does not align with that. And so then you see women that are trying to do something that they're not, let's make it a spiritual term, anointed to do, right? Not that they can't be leaders and all that. We see a lot of great people doing that. But I think it's this whole idea that you've had way too many people that are not taking individual responsibility as men, that are spiritual leaders in their home and in their community. And then you have people that aren't, their primary role is not to be the spiritual and leader of a uh, whatever you want to put that in, especially a family. They have to step up into it, and that gives room for the enemy to bring in these ideologies and these lies that really become an issue. So the call to action is men step up and take your role seriously, not only being involved in the community and civics and all that, but really at home, leading the family and prayer and all of these kind of things. That's what's, I feel like we talked about this, an opportunity for evangelism, for spiritual awakening, all that. I think that all revolves around these ideas.
Yeah, and I would like to chime in on that too. Just something hit my spirit that's very powerful. Can do versus should do. Whether it's voting or leading your family, what does that look like? Can do versus should do. There's a lot of stuff that men can do that they shouldn't do. Same thing goes for women as well. So getting that in the proper alignment doesn't make one less than and one greater than. My mom is an amazing individual, very strong Christian leader in the home, but she respects the call, that my dad has upon his life, and the mandate that's been given to him by God, regardless if he chooses to live up to that or not. There's just an alignment there. And I've seen so many blessings come to my mom because she chose to just believe what the word of God says and to follow it to the best of her ability. And likewise, I've seen my dad, because of the call that's on his life and the mandate that God has given him as a man, I've seen him struggle because he chose not to come into alignment with that in different areas, or I would say struggled to, because we all struggle with what God is calling us to do and aligning with the word of God. And the better we're able to do that and navigate that, everybody's blessed, just not just you individually or your family, but the community and the nation and the world is blessed because of it.
I actually mentioned that a little bit on my own weekly podcast yesterday, where Grace and I, my co-host, were just coming to terms with the idea that people felt like their voice didn't matter anymore in the wake of this particular election, because one of the things we hit on was how wrong the polling was leading up to this election. I mean, the polls would have told you that the incumbent attorney general here in Virginia was going to win. Instead, he lost handily. The guy we talked about earlier with the desires to murder his political opponents won over 50% of the vote. So I think a lot of people, I won't go as far to say is disenfranchised, but they definitely feel like their voice has the least amount of power ever. And one thing we tried to encourage people with is your voice never has no power, no matter what scenario you find yourself in. Now, we at FPA, I think the conservative movement around the world does seek to keep the franchise to make sure everybody's voice has equal effect in the political system. One person, one vote, equal access to that vote for citizens, all those things. So we're working for that. But just beyond that, I think the very notion of being a Christian is that your voice has this inherent spiritual impact. My CG right now is, or my Connect group, my small group is going through Proverbs right now, which is, and Psalms and Proverbs constantly talk about how the power that your voice has in terms of shaping the world around you, the creative power of it. And at the end of the day, we serve a God who came as one man with one voice. And as one man, he changed the face of the world forever. Now, he was God, but we are made in his image. And this is part of being made in the image of God, is that your voice as one person, you, one man or one woman, can have immense impact for good or evil on this world. And it's times like this, it's tempting to forget that or think it's false. I'm here to come back and tell you your voice matters. And frankly, our country, the world needs your voice. They need the voice of Christians and people of faith really desperately right now. And especially when it comes to men, Mark, as you mentioned earlier, men need to hear that. They need to know that there is something beyond them that they are called to serve into. So for any man listening to this from the sounds of my voice, the church needs you, your country needs you, and the world needs you. So the worst thing you could do coming out of this is think my voice doesn't matter. Your voice will always matter because God loves you and he created you in his image to have creative power with your voice.
Love that. I know you guys are very active at Family Policy Alliance with helping people understand like what their, what kind of resources they have at their hands to be able to take advantage of. Now, do you already have something in the works post this election as a response or just action items that you're encouraging people to, move forward with? Or what kind of things are you guys focusing on uh, post this election season?
Yeah, great question. I appreciate that, Mark. We will have a very coherent plan leading up to or leading through next year. I feel like I think I mentioned a couple days ago when I talked to you guys for the first time that FPA doesn't have a huge grassroots organization of our own, but we do through our state affiliate network that I mentioned, which we call State Family Policy Councils or FPCs. These are all Christian ministries that work, nonpartisan ministries that work on the same issue areas that FPA works on in their individual states. There are about 40 of them. You can find them all on our website, familypolicyalliance.com. Upper right-hand corner is the tab called Allies. And the nice thing I can say, especially if you were in one of the jurisdictions where these elections took place the other night, we have a state FPC affiliate in every one of those jurisdictions. We have them in New York State, in New Jersey, and in Virginia. So I can tell you, especially here in Virginia, we'll have a very coherent plan to support Virginia Family Foundation leading up to their elections next year, which will be critical because there are two very, I would argue, demonic constitutional ballot amendments up for consideration by the electorate here. I don't like to use the term demonic unless I think it really warrants it. In this case, I think it does because most Americans, they may not be totally pro-life like me, but they definitely believe that abortion is not a good thing and should generally have some significant regulations on it. One of those state constitutional amendments that is proposed next year would remove every restriction the Commonwealth has left on abortion. So not just at what month in the pregnancy you can get an abortion. If this passes, you'll be able to have birthday abortions in the Commonwealth. But beyond that, we'll remove all safety restrictions from abortion. So there will be no longer any licensing required, any safety standards for the clinics, no hospital admitting privileges for whoever performs the abortion will be required. Anyone could do this. And I can't help but call that demonic because it will lead to a wave of death in children in the Commonwealth that could be very preventable. So that's just one of the amendments. The other one basically completely erases women from the law. I won't get into that, but just saying that alone should tell you why I think it's demonic because women exist and God loves them and created them. This amendment would basically erase them from the law or any distinctions between men and women. So we will definitely be supporting Virginia Family Foundation's very clear, definitive plan to oppose those ballot measures at law. Um, and then we'll have our general midterm election plans, just people we strategies we generally support, values we want people to vote. I will just touch on New Jersey briefly because that was where one of these elections was held, and the Democrat governor candidate Mikey Sherrill won. She was very clear that she wants New Jersey schools to continue to explicitly teach LGBT lessons and materials as a positive moral good and an affirmation for that. That's obviously against biblical values for Christians. And she made very clear that she doesn't think parents should be able to opt their kids out of those lessons. So we will be supporting our state family policy council there, which is New Jersey Family Policy Center, as they encourage parents to more aggressively assert their rights when needed. So I want people to know that that might be the policy of the new governor and the teachers unions in New Jersey. But the U.S. Supreme Court did rule this summer that parents have a right to opt their children out of LGBTQ lessons and exposure to materials. To parents, I would just encourage you, you can and you should, if you feel led, aggressively assert your rights to opt children out of that, out of those lessons. Your state FPC can help with that. I know New Jersey Family Policy Center will be facilitating help for that and connecting parents to lawyers that can help them as well. So these are some of our more tangible ways forward. Um, and then in New York, I'll just mention because we do have New York Families there as our state affiliate there. They're led by a great pastor named Jason McGuire. He's got a documentary coming out soon about his own religious persecution there. He was persecuted and harassed by the state attorney general, Letitia James, and she actually forced him to accept a prison sentence just for his beliefs, which he has now served. It was 8 weekends in jail. But he'll be forever tainted as an inmate in the New York State prison system, all because he stands for Christian values and pro-family values. I would encourage people, if you're in New York, follow and support Jason. Check out his documentary. It's very well produced and shot. The trailer is online. I know the film crew he's worked with. It's going to be excellent. So those are just some tangible things I can share with people at this moment about where to go going forward, and just don't take polls too seriously in elections going forward because this election taught us that they are wrong and your voice does matter.
Yeah, it's just a real quick. Why are those polls so inaccurate from time to time? You got any thoughts on that?
Yeah, great question. I think the polling industry has actually been in a tizzy since 2016, if I'm being perfectly honest, Mark. I'm not an expert in polling. Obviously, I evaluate and utilize polling for my job. But I think we can't overstate how much the 2016 election shocked the world. I'll never forget because I was in law school watching with my friends. We thought that was going to be a miserable night, and then it turned out to be, quite a surprise. Um, the tweet I'll never forget came from a CNN political commentator, and about halfway through the night, when it became clear that Donald Trump was going to pull off this upset, he just tweeted, "Is it possible we know nothing about politics?" And some of us who watch CNN have been screaming at him, yes, for years. But the bottom line is that's where people have been at for this long is, okay, which way is up, basically? And so, a couple elections after that, you had Republicans underpolled. Then you had this one, I would argue, where they were overpolled pretty much everywhere except New York. Even in New York, though, the New York polling would have told you Zohran Mamdani was going to win, but he was going to win with a minority of New Yorkers, right? He was going to win with like 44 or 46%, Andrew Cuomo's 40%. That's a clear win, but it doesn't mean that one out of every two New Yorkers voted for him. Well, he won over 50% of the vote. That's what we call a mandate in politics. So even amongst Democrat-minded the electoral bases, the polling was still wrong, which is why I think people should, I mean, take the polls as one data point, but I wouldn't take any to the bank. And then you definitely don't use it as an excuse to stay home on election day when if nothing else you've taken away from this conversation, it shows that there are real people, real suffering at stake because of real values discussions and debates between Christian values and those that oppose God. That alone, I think, is enough of a nudge for Christians, really an obligation for Christians to step up and make their voice heard. And if you are wondering how to do that or how to evaluate the issues in your states and in our country, that's what FPA is here for. Mark, you and Dr. J are great at this as well. And that's what our local state family policy councils are here to do, is to equip you to make your voice heard in a way that honors God and reflects his values.
Hey, one other thing that could be a reason is that these people taking the polls, they think they're actually voting and they don't realize that's not a vote.
For some people, I think that's true. Yeah, some people want to skew the polls too intentionally.
That could be it. We're going to wrap up here pretty soon, Joseph. But, I was just thinking, I was seeing all of this wonderful, illustrious bookshelves you got behind you. It made me think, like, are there any books or a book that you recommend that people read that, or a recent one, or just a favorite of yours that you would say, hey, you need to check this out?
Yeah,
Good read.
great, great question. I mean, as you can see, I have a lot to choose from here.
Yeah,
So
sure.
I could go on about that for a while. I think a good true north these days, because he was so prescient, is C.S. Lewis. If you've never really engaged strongly with C.S. Lewis's works, I would really encourage you to. I think books like Mere Christianity and The Weight of Glory are particularly relevant for today's work. For example, Lewis pretty much foresaw all of identity politics and eviscerated it back then, and he's only continued to be proven right. Abolition of Man as well, though that's very dense. I would recommend buying the great C.S. Lewis scholar Michael Ward's companion book to The Abolition of Man called After Humanity, because he really breaks down the density of that. Especially if you're new to Lewis, I wouldn't start there, but Abolition of Man, if you're a Lewis fan, is a must read. Um, I would just add maybe two recent books that I think would be particularly prescient for this audience here, for ministers, people who care about these issues these days, is to recognize that unbiblical ideology has really infiltrated the institutional church across all of Protestantism and Catholicism, I would argue. I work with people across the denominational spectrum at FPA. It's one of my favorite things about my job is because we've all looked real evil in the face, we are able to agree to disagree on some of our more niche theological proclivities and just to work together to stop a much more pressing, much more obvious evil. So I love that about my job. And sometimes it can be difficult to distinguish, well, some people might have been a little institutionally captured by anti-Christian ideology. There are two books that can really help people with this. The most important one I'd recommend is called Stockholm Syndrome Christianity. It's by actually a former instructor of mine, Dr. John West. He works for the Discovery Institute. He's a lifelong academic, great man. I've heard him lecture multiple times. His new book is called Stockholm Syndrome Christianity. And it talks about this, how easy it is for Christian leaders and institutions to be bludgeoned into submission to people and ideologies that hate them. And I wish that could say that wasn't true, but it's happened a lot. And a good companion support piece to that is a book called Shepherds for Sale by Megan Basham, who's a reporter, great investigative reporter and researcher, person of faith. She's a great Twitter follow too, Megan Basham, or X follow. But her book Shepherds for Sale is, I would argue, a great companion to Dr. West in his book Stockholm Syndrome Christianity, which I keep those books nearby just because the index is so helpful. If I hear about a ministry or a person, and I always want to give people who profess to be Christians the benefit of the doubt. But in my line of work, I have to do my due diligence, and sometimes I just go to the index and see, okay, if they're in the index of one of these two books, maybe I should see what these people say about them. So yeah, that's it right there. Shepherds for Sale by Megan Basham. Um, and I think both of them are so great, not just because they're mudslinging. Yeah, that one particularly is great because it shows a way out, and it gives a nuanced perspective on certain Christian figures that I know people listening will love, like Tim Keller. Dr. West has, good and bad things to say about Dr. Keller's work, particularly at the end of his life. I was basically discipled by Tim Keller's work, so I love him. And this allows me to help balance some of what I think were mistakes that he made later in his life with his whole body of work, and how even that whole body helps point to a way out of this. So I would strongly, strongly recommend those two books. Both of the authors are very prevalent talking about these issues online and on YouTube. So if you want a taste, go on there. But for Christians dealing in the institutional Christian world these days, those two books are the nonpareil in my mind.
Yeah, and they both have sheep related titles, so you can't go wrong.
Exactly,
Keeping
exactly. It's
keep
providential for
down.
me to mention them.
Yeah, very good. And we will draw everyone's attention to
Oh,
familypolicyalliance.com.
thank you, Mark.
Joseph, you made some mention of different things, resources there.
Yeah.
Everybody can go check that out. You
Since
can,
you're on here, Mark, I can just point out top right is where the Allies tab is. That's all of our state family policy council affiliates. So if you're in one of those 40 states, and if you're in a state that doesn't have it, states like Missouri or Oregon, you're interested in starting a group like this, we are always on the lookout to help people get started because we know what right looks like. And if you just go back to the homepage, Mark, I'll just point out one other thing while we're here. If you scroll down, what you'll start seeing these horizontal banners. So there's Life After Roe. You scroll down before that, I think you'll see, okay, Restoring Faith in America. That's a cross project with Christians engaged. But go down one more if you don't mind. Yeah, Help Not Harm. That's another. These are our major campaigns sorted around our policy issue areas. So Help Not Harm is about protecting kids from gender ideology, particularly physiological scientific interventions like surgeries, puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones. After Roe is our pro-life campaign. There's our Save Girls Sports campaign because we started that campaign to reserve girls' sports specifically for biological girls. Um, each of these links, and Let Parents Parents is our parental rights campaign. You'll see a lot of our work to restore parental rights, particularly online. Those pages describe our work in those specific areas. So if you want to know more about what we do, I think those websites are, or at least those pages in our website, are pretty good explainers of them and give an idea of the breadth of our work and the impact we've had in them.
Yeah, that's amazing. And there's one other thing that if you're watching this stream on a replay or whatever, you failed to witness, which was one of the potential thumbnails that we thought about using for this. This is AI. Joseph did not really do this, but it is crazy though, right? Like we
Oh
took
man,
this picture, which was actually happened in your last appearance with
thinking that
us.
should be my new profile picture
Yeah,
on
yeah.
X. What do you think, Mark? It's awfully
Oh,
tempting.
you
Yeah.
got jazz hands right there, man. That's what it looks
I
like.
think the last time I had that face was election night 2016. So
There you go. But anyway, that's just something for fun. But we're so thankful, Joseph, that once again that you're doing what you're doing. You're making a difference in what is happening on the policy side in the family, and of course, like you said, allies. Those are all very important pieces of what you guys are doing. So grateful to spend some more time with you today to get some of your reaction and wisdom and the way forward as well. Dr. J, any final words from your side of the ledger?
Man, I just love being a part of Sheep Feast. I love individuals like Joseph and some of the other people that we've had on these corral calls. Um, if anybody's out there and you're listening to one of these corral calls, 2000 qubit rule, you want to connect, figure out how to get involved with anything that Joseph has said, or maybe another call that you've listened to, uh, reach out. We're real people. We're not too far off. So I'm just happy to be here. I'm happy for the work that God is doing through amazing people like Joseph and the rest of his team. And this is what it's about, right? This is like we're working together collectively to get the message out, make sure people have the resources, tools that they need to do the work that they're called to. And I just feel blessed to be here.
yeah, I'm the one thankful to be here with you too. I mean, you guys are just, first of all, you're two great brothers in Christ that I'm thankful for. And the ministry you have here, Sheep Feast, is awesome. So to everybody who's listening now or will later, I just encourage you, continue to come back here. Reach out to any of us, including FPA. We have a contact us form on our website, and we do individually read those. There's not AI or computers reading those for us. So we respond to all our correspondence. And I would just encourage people, thanks for putting up with me on here yammering about this stuff. Hopefully, I at least conveyed how important a lot of it is. But I'm honored to be able to speak into this ministry you two have built. So thank you, Mark and Jay. It's been an honor.
Yes, sir. Thanks again, Joseph. And for everybody that didn't realize, this was a special election reaction edition of Through the Working Shoot, where Jay and I shoot the breeze. We were glad to have Joseph to shoot the breeze with us. And you'll see us again out on here. We don't always go live with these, but it's a special circumstance, and we're glad to have connected and had a chat on the shoot, shooting the breeze. All right. If you don't know what a working shoot is, go to our YouTube channel. We explain it a little bit. That's a little bit of a mystery for some of you, I'm sure. All right, everybody. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll catch you guys next time. Be blessed.
Take care, everyone. Thank you both.
See ya.